Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we step into one of the most powerful and unforgettable moments in the life of Jesus, the story of how he heals a blind man. Imagine for a moment what it must feel like to live in complete darkness, never once seeing the face of your loved ones, never gazing at the beauty of a sunrise, never knowing the colors of the sky or the expressions of a friend. That is the world of a blind man, where life is limited to sounds, textures, and imagination. Yet into that world of darkness steps Jesus, bringing light, hope, and a miracle that still echoes through centuries. The streets were busy, dusty, and filled with voices. People walked past quickly, some too wrapped in their own lives to notice the man sitting silently by the roadside. For years he had been there, begging, waiting, surviving on scraps of kindness. To many he was invisible, just another poor beggar on the edge of the city. But today was different. Something was stirring in the air. Whispers spread among the crowd that Jesus of Nazareth was passing through. Some said he was a prophet, others claimed he was a teacher, and still others dared to believe he might be the long-awaited Messiah. As the blind man listened, he could hear the crowd pressing closer, their voices rising with excitement. He had heard stories before, how Jesus turned water into wine, how he fed thousands with only a few loaves and fish, how he healed the sick and even raised the dead. But now, this miracle worker was near him, close enough that hope began to awaken inside his heart. Could it be possible that his life, which had been bound in darkness since birth, might change forever in just one encounter? The disciples of Jesus walked alongside him, trying to keep order as the people pushed forward. Some in the crowd questioned why a man born blind would suffer such a fate. Was it because of his own sins, or the sins of his parents? To them, his blindness was a mystery, an unsolvable question of suffering and punishment. But for Jesus, this man's condition was not a punishment at all. It was a moment waiting to reveal the glory of God. The blind man, hearing the commotion, cried out louder than the noise around him, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." His voice broke through the crowd, trembling with desperation, yet full of faith. Some people tried to silence him, embarrassed by his boldness, but he would not stop. He had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The footsteps of Jesus grew closer. The crowd's voices fell to a hush. The man could sense a presence before him, powerful yet gentle, unlike any he had ever known. He waited, his heart racing, his entire life balanced on this moment. Would Jesus notice him? Would he stop? Would he reach into the darkness and bring sight to eyes that had never seen? And just as the tension reached its highest point, something unexpected happened. The air was heavy with silence, as if every voice in the crowd was waiting to hear what Jesus would do next. The blind man sat there, his heart pounding like never before. For years, he had been used to disappointment. People walking past, pretending not to see him, tossing a coin only out of pity. But this time felt different. There was something in the atmosphere, a sense of expectation that made the hairs on his arms rise. He could not see, but he could feel the weight of every gaze and the hush that spread as Jesus stopped. The disciples exchanged glances. Some of them wondered why their teacher would slow down for someone like this. After all, there were so many people pressing to see him, so many voices calling out for his attention. But Jesus did not see as others saw. To him, the man in the dust was not just a beggar on the roadside. He was a soul, a life that mattered, a story waiting to be transformed. The blind man's cries were not an interruption. They were an invitation. Around them, the crowd whispered. Some doubted. "How can this man heal someone who has been blind since birth?" they muttered. "This is impossible. No doctor, no priest, no healer has ever opened the eyes of one born without sight." Others, however, leaned forward with hope, eager to see whether the rumors about Jesus were true. If he could restore the eyes of this man, then surely he carried a power greater than anything they had known. The blind man's voice trembled as he repeated his plea, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Each word carried years of pain, longing, and faith. He had never seen the world, but somehow he believed in the one who could change everything. He did not beg for coins or food this time. He begged for sight, for life, for the chance to finally step out of darkness. The disciples tried to guide the man closer, but the crowd was restless, uncertain of what would unfold. A few shook their heads, unwilling to believe that such a miracle could happen. Others pressed closer, determined not to miss even a breath of this moment. The blind man sat in silence now, waiting. He could feel that Jesus was near, so near that he could almost sense his shadow fall upon him. The tension deepened. The beggar's entire life balanced on this one encounter, a moment that could either pass like all the others or become the turning point of his existence. The crowd held its breath, straining to see what Jesus would do. And then, with every eye fixed on him and every ear waiting for his next words, Jesus began to move toward the blind man. As Jesus stepped closer, the voices in the crowd grew sharper, divided between faith and doubt. Some pushed forward eagerly, whispering, "He will do it! He will heal him!" While others frowned, crossing their arms with skepticism. To them, this blind beggar was a test. If Jesus failed, then all his other works could be questioned. The moment had become more than just about one man's sight. It had become a question of truth, of power, of who Jesus really was. The disciples themselves felt the weight of it. They had seen Jesus perform many wonders, yet each new encounter stirred uncertainty. Would he heal this man who had never seen a single ray of light? Some feared the disappointment that might follow if nothing happened. Others wondered whether this man's blindness held a deeper meaning that they were still too small to understand. Meanwhile, whispers about sin continued to rise. Many in the crowd argued that the man's suffering must be a punishment, that perhaps he was paying for the mistakes of his family. This stirred anger in some, pity in others, but for the blind man it was another layer of shame he had carried all his life. Every rumor, every harsh word, every stare had reminded him that he was different, broken in the eyes of society. Now, sitting before Jesus, he longed not only for healing of his eyes, but also for freedom from the judgment that had defined him. The conflict deepened as voices clashed, faith against doubt, hope against fear, compassion against condemnation. The blind man sat silent, caught between the pull of the crowd and the presence of the one before him. And in that tense moment, the question still lingered in the air. What would Jesus do next? The air around the blind man grew heavy with anticipation as Jesus drew near. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the murmurs of the crowd. The beggar's hands trembled as he clutched the edge of his cloak, not knowing what was about to happen, only sensing that everything could change in an instant. The people pressed in tightly, some standing on their toes, desperate to see every detail. It was as if the entire city had stopped to watch this single encounter. The man's voice broke the silence once more, raw and urgent. "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me!" His cry pierced through the noise, echoing in the hearts of those who listened. Some tried again to hush him, embarrassed by his persistence, but others leaned closer, moved by the desperation in his tone. Every plea carried a question that no one dared to voice aloud. Would Jesus respond, or would he walk on? The tension thickened as Jesus finally stopped. The moment stretched like eternity. All eyes fixed on him, waiting for his next move. Would he confirm the doubts of the skeptics, or prove beyond question the hope of the faithful? Even the disciples held their breath, unsure of what their teacher was about to do. The blind man could sense his presence now, closer than before, filling the air with something unexplainable. He did not know if Jesus would touch him, speak to him, or simply pass by. But his heart pounded with an unshakable faith that this moment would not be wasted. Then Jesus bent slightly, as if preparing to act. The crowd leaned in, every soul braced for what was about to unfold. And in that charged silence, the climax of the story stood just one breath away. Just as the crowd leaned in, expecting Jesus to instantly speak words of healing, something surprising happened. Instead of reaching out with a blessing right away, Jesus knelt down to the ground. The people shifted uncomfortably, whispering in confusion. Dust swirled in the air as he pressed his hands into the earth, drawing the attention of every pair of eyes. Some gasped, uncertain of what he was doing. Others exchanged nervous glances, murmuring that this was not how miracles were supposed to begin. The blind man, though unable to see, could hear the scraping sound and feel the tension growing all around him. For a moment, doubt surged stronger than hope. What if nothing happened? What if this was a test meant only to expose the man's weakness? The whispers in the crowd grew louder. Is he really going to heal him? Why does he delay? Why touch the ground when the man needs his eyes opened? Questions hung in the air like a storm, raising the stakes for everyone who stood there. If this moment ended in failure, the faith of many would collapse, and the skeptics would claim victory. The blind man sat still, his heart pounding, torn between fear and faith. Every nerve in his body was alive with expectation. He could feel the heat of the sun, the closeness of the crowd, and the silence of Jesus working before him. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath. The disciples shifted uneasily, uncertain of what lesson their teacher was weaving into this strange act. But Jesus often worked in ways that were unexpected, ways that challenged people to look beyond appearances. Still, the delay made the moment heavier, as if the outcome was hanging on a thin thread. Then, with the crowd pressing closer, Jesus slowly rose, holding something formed from the earth itself. The atmosphere quivered, and every eye strained to see what would happen next. The miracle everyone longed for seemed near, but the way it was unfolding left them more unsettled than ever, caught between awe and uncertainty, bracing for a moment that could change everything. Jesus stood before the blind man, holding the mixture of earth in his hands. The crowd was frozen in suspense, unable to look away. In a move that shocked many, he gently placed the clay upon the man's eyes. Gasps rippled through the people. Some whispered in disbelief, "What is he doing?" Others leaned closer, desperate to witness the outcome. The beggar sat motionless, his heart racing, surrendering himself fully to this moment. He did not resist, for something deep within told him that this act was no ordinary gesture. It carried a purpose beyond human understanding. Then Jesus spoke with calm authority, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." His words were simple, yet they rang with power. The man, still unable to see, rose slowly to his feet. The crowd parted, watching with curiosity and doubt. Some mocked, saying, "He sends him away, still blind." Others wondered if this strange command was part of the miracle itself. The man stumbled forward, guided by the memory of the path and the hands of those willing to help. Every step was heavy with suspense, the outcome still hidden. At last, he bent down at the pool, scooping water with trembling hands to wash his eyes. The crowd leaned forward, their breaths caught in anticipation. The moment his face touched the water, light broke into his darkness. His eyes opened, blurry at first, then sharper, until for the first time in his life he saw the sky, the water, and the faces around him. A cry burst from his lips, half laughter, half tears. He could see. The people shouted in shock and amazement. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. Others refused to believe it, insisting, "This is not the same man, it only looks like him." But the beggar, no longer blind, raised his voice and declared with certainty, "I was blind, and now I see." Yet even in the joy of the miracle, a new tension stirred. Leaders in the crowd frowned, unsettled by what had taken place. To them, this healing was not just a miracle. It was a challenge to their authority. Whispers of doubt, jealousy, and anger began to rise again, hinting that this story was not yet finished, and that the gift of sight had awakened more than just the eyes of one man. The man who had been blind stood blinking in the sunlight, tears streaming down his cheeks as he looked at the world for the very first time. Every color, every face, every shape was new and overwhelming. He laughed and cried at once, falling to his knees in gratitude. People pressed around him, some hugging him in joy, others still arguing whether this could truly be the same man who had once sat begging by the roadside. But his voice was steady and clear. "Yes, it is me. I was blind, but now I see. Jesus healed me." As word spread, the excitement turned into debate. Some celebrated the miracle as proof that Jesus was indeed the one sent by God. Others, especially the religious leaders, grew uneasy. They questioned him harshly, asking again and again how his eyes had been opened. But the man's answer never changed. "A man called Jesus put clay on my eyes and told me to wash. I obeyed, and now I see." His testimony was simple, yet it carried a power no one could deny. Though some leaders refused to believe, the people could not ignore what had happened. The man who once lived in darkness was now walking with sight, his steps steady, his eyes wide with wonder. His healing was more than just a physical change. It was a sign of hope, proof that faith and obedience could open doors that had always seemed closed. The blind man's story ended not in silence or shame, but in light and courage. Where others saw punishment or hopelessness, Jesus saw an opportunity for the glory of God to be revealed. And through one act of compassion, the world around that man was transformed forever. This story of Jesus healing the blind man still speaks today. It reminds us that no darkness is too deep, no situation too hopeless, and no life too hidden for the touch of God's mercy. It challenges us to see beyond appearances and to believe that miracles can happen when faith cries out and refuses to be silenced. In the end, the man's first sight was not only of the world around him, but of the truth that set him free.